Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is this expectation of precision that we all find like incredibly comforting.
Oh, sure. It feels very cut and dry.
Right. It is almost like engineering. You fall off your bike, your arm is throbbing, you go to the hospital, and they put you in that cold room with the humming machine.
Yeah, the X-ray machine.
Yeah, and the X-ray pops up on that glowing screen, and it shows that jagged, undeniable white line running right through the bone.
And the doctor just points at it and says, there is your problem.
Yes, it is visible. It is categorical. You are dealing with a clean assessment. Broken or not broken. We love that kind of clarity.
We really do. We want things neatly categorized.
We do, because then we know precisely what we're dealing with and how to fix it. But then you step into the world of human morality.
Which is a whole different ballgame.
Entirely.
Yeah.
You step into the landscape of societal decay, relational fractures, and personal spiritual ruin, and suddenly that X-ray machine is broken.
The imaging is totally murky.
Right. We see the symptoms everywhere. We see the social decay, the cruelty on the news, the broken families, the greed. But finding that jagged white line, the root cause of the fracture, it requires a different kind of imaging.
It's a completely different diagnostic tool.
So welcome to Reformed Thinking. I'm so glad you are joining us for this deep dive. Today, our mission is to provide that alternative imaging.
We're going to look at some fascinating historical data today.
We are. We are going to dissect a massive linguistic and theological dossier on a single ancient Greek word, which is Asebeia.
And that is a word that holds an incredible amount of diagnostic weight in the ancient world.
It really does.
When we look at this source material, we're looking at the keys to understanding how ancient thinkers categorize the root of human dysfunction.
And the sources we have today are really varied, aren't they?
Very varied. We have lexical entries breaking down the Greek grammar. We have extensive cross-references to the Septuagint, which is, the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament.
Right.
We also have citations from ancient secular literature, ranging from the philosopher Plato to mundane Egyptian papyri.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. And on top of all that, we have a formidable bibliography of modern academic commentary, analyzing how this word functions across dozens of grammatical scenarios.
Now, you listening right now might be asking yourself, why spending time on a single ancient word matters to your life today, especially when you have modern psychology and sociology at your fingertips.
It is a fair question to ask.
It is. But understanding these ancient lexicons is the key that unlocks the structural concepts of human morality.
It gives us the precise vocabulary to understand the true nature of what goes wrong in the human soul.
So, to start us off, we need to establish the baseline definition. We need to know what we're looking at when we read this word on the page.
Let's open the dossier.
Yeah. What is the fundamental definition of Asebeia?
When we open the lexicon, the baseline definition we are presented with is impiety, ungodliness, or profaneness.
Okay, so a very religious connotation right out of the gate.
Yes. The sources define it as living in a manner that is completely contrary to proper religious beliefs and practice. It is a state of active godlessness.
Active godlessness. That feels very intentional.
It is. And to really grasp this, we need to look at the mechanics of the word itself. We see a whole family of words in the Greek text.
Like variations of the same root.
Precisely. We have the noun form, Asebeia. We have the adjective, Asebeis, which describes the ungodly person. And we have the verb asebio, which is the action of acting in an ungodly manner.
Okay, that makes sense.
And all of these variations are rooted in a negation. The word begins with an alpha privative.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. An alpha privative sounds like something out of a high-level grammar seminar.
It does sound a bit academic.
For those of us who haven't taken ancient Greek, how does that function in the language?
Well, it is actually a concept we use in English all the time without realizing it. Think about the word typical.
Okay.
If you put an A in front of it, you get atypical, meaning not typical. The prefix negates the root word.
Oh, sure. Or like moral becoming amoral.
Spot on. The ancient Greeks did the exact same thing. The root of our word is related to the concept of sebomai.
And what does that mean?
It means reverence, awe, and giving proper respect to the divine. It is the posture a creature is supposed to have before its creator.
So when you add that alpha privative to the front, creating Asebeia, you are describing the active structural absence of that reverence.
Yes, that is the key.
Oh.
It's not just passive ignorance.
Like someone who just hasn't heard about God.
Right. It is not that. It is living without any regard for the divine order. As the lexical entry from Liu and Nida points out in our sources, it is living without regard to a religious belief or practice.
It is a very specific condition of the soul, then.
It is, and our sources indicate it has devastating consequences for how a human being operates in the physical world.
That structural aspect is what catches my attention right away. Before we look at where this word appears in the grand sweep of history, our sources insist we must first establish its spatial orientation.
The spatial orientation is really helpful for visualizing this.
I love how the text visualizes this in relation to human behavior. The lexicon notes that, generally speaking, Asebeia is understood vertically.
It operates on a vertical axis.
Yeah. It is a lack of reverence for deity and hallowed institutions, manifesting in sacrilegious words and deeds.
You were basically shaking your fist at heaven, or, simply acting like heaven is empty.
Right. And then the sources contrast this directly with its corollary term, which is adikia, and that operates horizontally.
Yes, adikia refers to a violation of human rights. It is doing wrong to your neighbor.
So we have a vertical axis of reverence and a horizontal axis of human relationships.
That spatial distinction is absolutely vital for diagnosing the human condition.
Because they aren't just two separate lists of rules.
No, the ancient writers did not view these as two separate, unrelated categories of bad behavior. They viewed them as an integrated system.
Right, and if we use an architectural analogy, I think it makes the relationship between these two axes very clear.
Let's hear it.
Imagine a massive ancient building. Asebeia is taking a sledgehammer to the load-bearing pillars of that building.
Destroying the vertical support.
Yeah, it is destroying the vertical relationship with the creator, the very columns that hold the heavy roof up.
Okay, I follow you.
Adikia, the horizontal violation of human rights, is like arguing with your roommate over how to arrange the furniture in the living room while the floor is actively collapsing beneath you.
That is a great image.
The horizontal reality is entirely dependent on the vertical structure holding it up. If the pillars go, the floor drops.
Which raises a massive question about cause and effect.
Right. Based on how these ancient writers use these specific words, can horizontal adikia, the violation of human rights, the relational fractures, the societal decay that even exist without vertical Asebeia triggering it first?
That is the crucial diagnostic question.
Yeah.
And our sources answer it by taking us directly to the theological framework laid out in Paul's letter to the Romans.
Okay, what does Paul say there?
The text references the first chapter, where Paul indicts humanity for dishonoring God. The verse states that the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness, that is our word, Asebeia, and unrighteousness, which is adikia.
So the ungodliness is listed first.
The order there is not accidental, it is entirely causal. The vertical rupture inevitably produces the horizontal damage.
Wow.
When human beings suppress the truth about the divine, when they replace the reverence for the Creator with the worship of created things, the load-bearing pillars are shattered.
So the progression is always vertical failure first, horizontal failure second. That really shifts the perspective on how we view the wrath of God in that passage.
How so?
Well, people often picture divine wrath as lightning bolts striking people down for doing bad things to each other.
Right, an active, immediate smiting.
Yeah, but this paints a different picture. It paints a much more terrifying picture, honestly.
It does. The wrath of God in this specific context is often expressed by handing humanity over to the logical consequences of that structural collapse.
Just letting the floor cave in.
Yes. You cannot maintain horizontal integrity, respecting the rights and dignity of your fellow human beings, if you have obliterated the vertical reverence for the God who endows those human beings with dignity in the first place.
That makes perfect logical sense.
The lexicon specifically note that Asebeia is displayed in sacrilegious words and deeds. It is the root cause. Adikia is the radioactive fallout.
So when a society begins to experience massive horizontal fracturing, when you see injustice, cruelty, violation of rights, and the breakdown of basic trust, how would the ancients view that?
The ancient biblical writers would diagnose this not primarily as a horizontal political or social problem. They would diagnose it as the inevitable debris of a vertical collapse.
The lack of reverence for deity guarantees the violation of humanity.
100%.
That distinction changes how we view almost every social issue we face today.
It really reframes the whole cultural conversation.
It does. We spend all our energy, all our political capital, and all our resources trying to fix the horizontal adikia.
We try to enforce better furniture arrangement on the collapsing floor, to use your analogy.
Right. We write new laws, we create new social programs, but we are completely ignoring the shattered vertical pillar of Asebeia.
And the ancient perspective says you're wasting your time trying to fix the floor if you refuse to rebuild the pillar.
Now, knowing that the vertical rupture causes this horizontal fallout, we have to examine the specific physical behaviors that stem from this godlessness.
Which leads us to a closely related term introduced in our source material.
Yes. The text brings in a separate word to contrast and connect with Asebeia, and that word is Asebeia.
And while Asebeia deals with the vertical posture of the soul, Asebeia deals with the chaotic physical reality that follows.
How do the sources define Asebeia?
They define it as license, voluptuousness, debauchery, or sensual excess. It is characterized primarily in the physical bodily sphere.
So it is very tangible.
Yes. Our sources pull from the ancient historian Polybius, who associates it directly with bodily desires, and the orator Demosthenes, who links it to violent hubris and physical acting out.
The most striking line in the source text regarding this word is this: man necessarily falls victim to this when cut off from God.
That word necessarily is doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
It is framed as an absolute inevitability. It characterizes the pagan world in Paul's letter to the Ephesians, the ancient cities of Sodom and Gomorrah in Peter's second letter, and false teachers described in the book of Jude.
So we have this distinct sequence.
Right. Asebeia is the invisible root condition. It is the vertical severance that you cannot necessarily see with your eyes.
But Asebeia is the visible physical symptom. It is the sensual excess.
Like Asebeia is the human immune system failing completely.
Yep.
You cannot see the white blood cells dropping off inside the bloodstream.
But Asebeia is the specific, fatal, highly visible, opportunistic infection that takes over the body because the defenses are gone.
Exactly. I mean, spot on. I want to push back on how we normally categorize behavior here, though.
Okay, let's look at that.
Today, if someone is consumed by sensual excess, debauchery, or addiction, we frame it as a psychological issue, a coping mechanism, or a trauma response.
That is the modern diagnostic framework, yes.
So does the ancient source material suggest that extreme physical indulgence is actually a theological issue at its core?
It does, and it connects the physical to the theological in a way that modern society is often very uncomfortable addressing.
Uncomfortable is an understatement.
True. But you are spot on with the immune system analogy. The sources cite the Gospel of Mark, where Asebeia is listed among the evils that proceed from within the human heart, defiling the person.
It comes from the inside out.
Yes. They cite the letter to the Galatians, identifying it as a clear work of the flesh. They cite Peter's second letter, noting that many will follow the sensual, destructive ways of false teachers.
So the text explicitly states that a person necessarily falls victim to this when cut off from God.
It is not an accident or a mere behavioral glitch. It is a theological consequence.
Explain the mechanism behind that for me. Why does cutting off the vertical reverence automatically lead to physical, sensual excess?
That is a great question.
Why doesn't the person just become, morally neutral?
Because human beings are not designed to be neutral. We are, by our very nature, worshiping creatures.
They have to worship something.
Exactly. I mean, that is it. We're built to pour our reverence, our energy, and our devotion upward toward the Creator.
Okay, so what happens when that is blocked?
When the soul loses its divine anchor, when the vertical reverence of Asebeia is abandoned, that massive amount of internal worship energy does not just evaporate. It has to go somewhere.
Like water finding a new channel.
Yes. If we do not worship the Creator, the energy of that worship is immediately redirected toward the self and the senses.
So sensual excess, debauchery, and license are the physical acting out of a spiritual void.
It is a desperate, frantic attempt to fill an infinite theological emptiness with finite physical sensations.
So it is an impossible math problem.
The completely impossible equation.
You have an infinite hole left by the absence of God, and you are trying to fill it by shoveling finite physical pleasures into it.
Precisely. The tragedy of the pagan world described in Ephesians, which our sources mention, illustrates this perfectly.
What does that passage say?
The text says that having lost all sensitivity to God, they gave themselves over to sensuality, to indulge in every kind of impurity with a continual lust for more.
Notice the phrase continual lust for more.
It is a bottomless pit.
Because the physical sensation can never satisfy the spiritual void, the dose always has to be increased.
Which is why treating sensual excess solely as a behavioral quirk or a psychological coping mechanism completely misses the ancient diagnostic framework.
In this view, extreme physical indulgence is a glaring, flashing warning light of severe Asebeia.
The physical indulgence is the inevitable result of a soul in active rebellion against its design.
It is trying to medicate a severed vertical relationship with horizontal physical excess.
That is the core of it.
Now, here is where it gets really fascinating, because to fully grasp how the first-century writers understood this Greek word, we have to look backward in time.
We need to look at the translation history.
Yes, we need to see how earlier scholars used it to translate ancient Hebrew concepts. We are talking about the Septuagint,
Which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, completed a couple of centuries before the New Testament was written.
right? And our source material provides a massive list of alignments showing which specific Hebrew words were translated into the Greek word Asebeia.
The variety is staggering.
It is, and frankly, a bit confusing at first glance.
It is a very revealing list, though. Asteia is used 25 times to translate the Hebrew word pesha.
And what does pesha mean?
It is defined as crime, wantonness, or an offense concerning property.
Okay, property crimes. What else?
It translates the Hebrew word shama 10 times, which means violence or physical wrong, and it translates zimmah 9 times, meaning infamy, shameful behavior, or a wicked plan.
That is the part that stops me in my tracks.
Why is that?
Well, those Hebrew concepts feel incredibly physical and aggressively horizontal. Violence, offenses concerning property, public infamy.
They're very tangible earthly issues.
Right. If someone steals my property or commits a violent act against my neighbor, we view that as a horizontal crime. We view it as a crime against the victim or maybe a crime against the state.
That is how our modern legal system works, yes.
Yet, the ancient scholars translating the Hebrew scriptures chose to take these horizontal physical crimes and translate them into the vertically oriented Greek word Asebeia.
This word meaning ungodliness and impiety.
Think about the implications of that choice. Does this translation choice mean the ancient scholars viewed every single property crime, every single act of violence, as a direct vertical insult to the divine?
It absolutely does.
Wow.
And it reveals a theological framework that is utterly foreign to the modern secular mind.
How so?
The scholars who translated the Septuagint were making a massive theological statement with their vocabulary choices.
They weren't just picking words at random.
No, they understood that in a universe created, ordered, and sustained by a sovereign God, there is no such thing as a purely secular crime.
That is a heavy statement.
There is no such thing as a victimless crime. And there is no such thing as a crime where God is not the primary offended party.
I can see how violence might fit that, since human beings are made in the image of God.
Right.
But property crimes, a dispute over a stolen ox or a shifted boundary stone, how does that rise to the level of impiety?
The sources give us further clues by highlighting some of the more unique Hebrew alignments.
Give me an example.
For example, Asebeia is used to translate the Hebrew word zadon in the book of Deuteronomy, which means presumptuousness or overconfidence.
Presumptuousness.
Yes, it translates Sarah later in Deuteronomy, meaning obstinacy or falsehood. It even translates a word for trickery or fraud, mirma, in the book of Hosea.
So what ties all those together?
Whether the act is physical violence, chamas, or fraudulent business deal, mirma, the translators recognize the singular, toxic, animating force behind the action.
And what is that force?
That force is a presumptuous disregard for God. It is the staggering arrogance to act as if the judge of the earth does not see, or does not care, or does not exist.
So the action itself is almost secondary to the presumption behind it.
Yes, exactly. Or rather, yes, that's the core issue.
When you commit an offense concerning property, pesha, you are actively declaring that God's laws regarding stewardship, honesty, and neighborly love are void in your life.
You are acting with ungodliness.
Yes.
The list of Hebrew glosses in our dossier paints a comprehensive picture of a life lived entirely on one's own terms.
It covers a lot of ground.
It ranges from words meaning wicked person to words meaning abomination. By gathering all these varied horizontal sin-stealing, violence, fraud, obstinacy under the single Greek umbrella of Asebeia, the translators are teaching us a vital lesson about human rebellion.
Which of what?
They're saying that all sin, regardless of its earthly victim, is fundamentally an act of high treason against heaven.
High treason.
It is a failure to revere the divine order. When King David commits adultery and murder in the Old Testament and then repents in the Psalms, he says to God, "Against you and you only have I sinned."
That sounds crazy to modern ears because he clearly sinned against Bathsheba and Uriah.
He destroyed their lives.
But David understood the concept of Asebeia perfectly. The horizontal damage was horrific, but the core of the issue, the root of the rot, was his vertical rebellion against the Creator.
Every broken contract, every act of deceit is rooted in the presumption that God isn't watching.
That is a terrifyingly high standard.
It really is.
It means you cannot separate your social ethics from your theology.
You simply cannot.
Armed with this Old Testament foundation, this deep Hebrew background, our sources shift our focus forward.
We need to look at the New Testament writers.
Yes, we need to see how they deployed this heavily loaded word to warn their readers. They knew the baggage this word carried.
They knew it meant high treason.
The lexicon provides some key New Testament texts that hit like a ton of bricks.
They do not hold back.
We have Paul's second letter to Timothy, which warns that people will progress further in impiety.
A moving trajectory.
Yes. We have the letter to Titus, which contains a direct, urgent command for believers to deny or renounce ungodliness.
It is a very active command.
We see the book of Jude, which speaks of condemning everyone for their deeds of godlessness. And Jude also warns of people who are following profane desires.
Those are strong warnings.
I want to zero in on that specific phrasing from 2 Timothy, progress further in impiety.
Why that one?
Because it indicates an active, moving trajectory. It is not a static state of being where you just sit in your ungodliness and nothing changes.
No, it is highly kinetic. The ancient writers understood that sin is never stagnant.
It always wants more ground.
It always seeks to expand its territory within the human heart.
I picture a runaway train on a steep mountain pass.
That is a terrifying image.
Once the brakes of reverence are cut, once that vertical pillar is smashed, the momentum only increases.
You do not just park in a state of impiety, you accelerate into it.
The deeds of godlessness multiply. The profane desires consume more fuel. Gravity takes over.
It is a downward spiral.
I have to ask, looking at the wider sources, how do they describe the culmination of this progression? If you never hit the brakes, where does this runaway train of Asebeia eventually crash?
The destination of that runaway train is chillingly described in the extra-biblical early Christian literature provided in our text.
What does that literature say?
The lexicon cites an early letter from Clement, written near the end of the 1st century. It uses a very specific, visceral imagery regarding the fate of the rebellious.
What is the imagery?
It states they will be sated with their impiety.
Sated, meaning completely filled up.
Stuffed to the point of sickness.
Wow.
The text also connects this concept to the book of Proverbs, where wisdom is speaking about the naive and the mockers who refuse to listen.
What does wisdom say there?
Wisdom says that they will eat the fruit of their own ways and be filled with their own devices.
That illustrates a terrifying concept regarding how divine judgment operates.
It does.
The ultimate punishment for Asebeia is not necessarily fire raining down from the sky. Rather, it is being handed over completely to the impiety itself.
It is getting precisely what the ungodly soul desires, in full measure, without any restraint.
Until the soul is utterly sickened and destroyed by it.
That concept of judgment is incredibly bleak.
It is. It means the worst thing God could possibly do to a rebellious person is simply take his hands off the steering wheel and say, have it your way, take as much of it as you want.
It perfectly explains the urgency of the apostolic warnings.
Yeah, that makes sense of why they are so intense.
When Paul writes to Titus and commands believers to renounce ungodliness, it is an urgent command to jump off that train before the momentum becomes unstoppable.
Because the progression he mentions to Timothy is a warning about the hardening of the human heart.
It is a psychological and spiritual reality. Each impious deed, each profane desire indulged, cauterizes the conscience just a little bit more.
It makes the next sin easier.
It blinds the individual further to the reality of God. To be sated with impiety means reaching a point of absolute no return.
Where the capacity for reverence has been entirely consumed by the appetite for rebellion.
The soul is suffocated by its own choices. It eats the fruit of its own ways until it chokes.
That brings a whole new level of gravity to the conversation.
It is heavy material.
We have thoroughly analyzed the theological application of this word within the biblical and early Christian context. We see the mechanics of it.
But to truly grasp its weight in the ancient world, we have to look beyond the biblical page.
We do. We have to look at how regular people, bureaucrats, merchants, and secular philosophers use this word in their everyday life.
Because this wasn't just a word invented by theologians for church services.
Not at all. It was a word that carried massive weight in the public square.
The source text lists numerous occurrences outside biblical literature.
Like where?
The word appears in the works of classic Greek playwrights like Euripides. It shows up in the writings of historians like Xenophon.
So it is all over Greek literature.
It is a major topic for philosophers like Plato, specifically in his work discussing the laws of a city.
What about everyday documents?
We see it heavily utilized in ancient papyri dating all the way back to the 3rd century BC. The Jewish historian Josephus uses it extensively in his histories, and the Apostolic Father Papias refers to a paradigm of impiety.
I want to ask about this street-level, everyday use of the word, specifically regarding those papyri.
Okay, let's look at that.
For context, these papyri found in Egypt are often just mundane documents. They are legal contracts, property disputes, administrative letters, or records of grain sales that survived in the dry desert sand.
Very normal, everyday stuff.
Right. If this highly theological word representing high treason against heaven is just being tossed around on ancient grocery lists or property disputes, does that mundane usage dilute its theological severity?
It's a logical question to ask.
Does it make it just another common legal term rather than a devastating spiritual diagnosis?
When you look at how classical society functioned, the mundane usage argues the exact opposite. The presence of Asebeia in everyday legal documents and philosophical treatises does not dilute its theological severity at all. It demonstrates how heavily the ancient world relied on vertical reverence for basic social stability.
Because they didn't separate church and state like we do.
Right. In antiquity, religion and the state were not compartmentalized the way they are in the modern West. There was no concept of a purely secular public square.
So an offense against the gods was an offense against the city.
Yes. For Plato, when he is discussing the laws of an ideal city, Asebeia was viewed as an existential threat to the community.
A danger to the whole society.
A citizen who lacked reverence for the divine was considered a danger to the polis, the city-state. Impiety was not viewed as a private religious disagreement.
It wasn't just a matter of personal conscience or freedom of thought.
No, it was a civil crime. It was treason against the overarching order that guaranteed the safety, morality, and prosperity of the community.
Give me a hypothetical example of how this would play out in a mundane papyrus document.
Okay, sure.
If two merchants are arguing over a shipment of wheat, how does Asebeia enter the conversation?
If one merchant breaks the contract and steals the wheat, the other merchant might take him to the magistrate and accuse him of Asebeia.
Accusing him of impiety over wheat.
Yes, by using that word in a serious civil and legal dispute, it shows us that accusing someone of impiety was a major legal maneuver.
What is the accuser actually saying then?
The accuser is basically saying, this man broke our contract because he does not fear the gods.
Oh, wow.
And because he does not fear the gods, he cannot be trusted to uphold contracts, to respect boundaries, or to act justly toward his fellow citizens. He recognizes no higher authority than his own desires.
Just so, when the biblical writers adopted this specific word to describe human sin, they were tapping into a concept that every single Greek speaker already understood as catastrophic to human flourishing.
The apostles weren't introducing a new concept. They were elevating a known civil threat to its ultimate cosmic reality.
They were looking at their culture and saying, you know, that lack of reverence that your secular laws already punish because it ruins society?
Yes.
That attitude is, in truth, an offense against the one true creator, and it will dismantle your soul just as surely as it dismantles a city.
That makes the word incredibly potent.
It really does. It wasn't just a private thought. It was a public menace.
The ancient society knew instinctively that if the vertical pillar fell, the horizontal floor of commerce, law, and human rights would collapse.
They understood the architecture of morality much better than we often do today.
They certainly did.
That brings us to the final major section of our dossier. We have looked at how widely this word was utilized, from ancient Athens down to the legal papyri of Egypt and into the first century church.
We have covered a lot of history.
Now, we conclude our analysis by examining how modern scholars catalog, interpret, and stress test this vast amount of data.
The academic side of things.
Yes. The sources list an extensive bibliography of modern commentary work detailing these specific verses.
We have scholars like Peter Davids and Curtis Gies examining the appearances of the word in the book of Jude.
We have Harold Greenlee, Jerome Quinn, and the team of Bruce Molina and John Pilch dissecting the letter to Titus.
We have Jack Lundbaum and Thomas McComiskey examining the Old Testament roots in Deuteronomy and Malachi.
And at the very bottom of our source text, there is an exhaustive, incredibly detailed catalog of noun inflections.
The grammatical mapping in the source material is intense.
Tell me about it.
It charts out the nominative, dative, accusative, and genitive cases in both singular and plural forms. We're talking about mapping nearly 80 distinct occurrences grammatically.
Right, and it feels a bit like looking at the blueprints of a massive complex engine where every single nut, bolt, and gear has been independently stress-tested by a team of linguistic engineers.
That is a good way to describe it.
I look at that list of grammar and I ask myself, what does this all mean for the person trying to live their life today?
It can feel very disconnected from daily life.
It can. I ask you, the listener, to consider why so many brilliant scholars have dedicated decades of their lives to parsing the exact grammar and historical context of this one single concept.
What is the payoff of mapping out every single noun inflection?
Yeah, why do it?
The sheer volume of scholarly focus exists because precise language dictates precise living.
Okay, unpack that.
When scholars map out all those noun inflections, they aren't just doing busy work. They are proving that this word was incredibly versatile.
It wasn't just a niche term used in one specific context.
Right. It could act as the subject of a sentence doing the action. It could be the object receiving the action. It could show possession.
It was a linguistic workhorse capable of describing a very broad spectrum of human failure.
Because it was so versatile, it required intense academic rigor to fully comprehend its reach.
So the grammar proves that impiety infects everything. It is systemic.
Yes. By tracing how the word moves through different grammatical cases and historical contexts, scholars ensure that we do not reduce sin to a simplistic or localized problem.
They ensure we see the full scope of the disease.
Furthermore, when you look at the commentaries, like Jerome Quinn's work on Titus, he brings out vital theological contrasts.
What kind of contrast?
Quinn identifies the faith as the matrix of Christian living. He contrasts that matrix directly against the ungodliness, the Asebeia, mentioned in the text.
The word matrix there implies a complete environment, an operating system for life.
Spot on. The Christian matrix is built entirely on reverence. The worldly matrix is built on impiety.
It is two completely different operating systems.
These scholars dedicate their lives to this analysis because understanding the exact contours of Asebeia is essential for diagnosing the human condition accurately.
The exhaustive academic work provides us with a high-definition MRI of the soul's pathology.
It confirms what the ancient writers knew instinctively. Ungodliness is the root of all human sorrow.
The scholarship validates the diagnosis.
It really does.
Let's pull all these threads together into a final synthesis. We started this conversation by looking for a diagnostic tool.
A way to see the root cause of the moral and social fractures we experience every single day.
Right. Through this deep dive into the source material, we have seen that the ancient X-ray machine works perfectly, but it points to a reality we often try to ignore because it makes us uncomfortable.
Very uncomfortable.
We examined how Asebeia describes the catastrophic vertical rupture with the divine. We saw how taking a sledgehammer to that vertical load-bearing pillar inevitably translates into horizontal damage, adikia.
You cannot have human rights without divine reverence.
We saw how this vertical rupture manifests physically as sensual excess, asebeia, as the desperate soul tries to fill an infinite divine void with finite, destructive pleasures.
A void that can never be filled that way.
We traced the runaway train of impiety, realizing that it aggressively builds momentum if left unchecked, until the terrifying moment when the soul is suffocated by getting precisely what it wanted.
Sated with impiety.
And we saw that even the secular ancient world understood this lack of reverence as a severe civil threat, a reality confirmed by an army of modern scholars parsing the grammar.
It is a sobering, comprehensive diagnosis of the human condition that leaves no room for excuses.
It is an airtight diagnosis, and it leaves us with a necessary question to ponder as we evaluate our own cultural moment.
We live in an era that invests massive amounts of energy, money, and political willpower attempting to address horizontal issues.
We create endless policies and institutions to deal with human rights, with violence, with economic disparities, and with social decay.
Yet we frequently attempt this massive horizontal repair job while entirely ignoring or even actively dismantling the vertical relationship with the divine.
We want the fruit of a moral society without cultivating the root of reverence.
We want the sturdy floor without the pillars.
Based on the ancient universal understanding of Asebeia that we have examined today, we have to ask ourselves a very hard question.
Is it actually possible to cure the horizontal symptoms of adikia without first restoring the vertical reverence we have lost?
That is the crucial question that brings all of this ancient text right into the present moment. You cannot fix the X-ray by rearranging the furniture while the floor collapses.
The structural integrity of human society and the human soul relies entirely on the vertical pillar.
Take that question into your week. Thank you for joining us for this analysis on reformed thinking. Keep reading, keep questioning, and we will catch you next time.